Hi, friends and family,
Welcome to Hope After Addiction
with your host, Katie Comer.
and Chelsea McLeod.
Welcome to Hope After Addiction. We are so happy that you have joined us this morning. I was about to say morning, but I don't know when y'all watch this. It might be at night in bed. So.
Yes, legit. I heard somebody the other day that was watching in the middle of the night. I was like, how many of us watch in the middle of the night in the fit of whatever we're going through because we're up all night?
Yeah.
And we're looking for hope and encouragement. And I had somebody tell me recently they were watching in the middle of the night. I was like, see, there are those of us.
So we record in the morning typically.
Yeah.
So I'm super prone to saying, and I probably have said it several
She's
times
okay.
in the morning.
Yeah.
Good morning. And you're like, oh, it's been a long day.
Yeah, it's midnight here.
Yeah. But how are you?
I'm well and
Yeah?
swollen. How are you?
Yeah, I got out of the car and she was like, my feet are swollen.
They're so bad. I came in 2 nights ago from work because I've been working back-to-back days, like 14-hour days. And John said, I need you to go sit down right now. I was like, yes, sir.
Bless it.
We've
It
gotten
will
some
be
good
over soon.
cackles, though.
I mean, I know. I remember.
Yeah.
I remember that time. And then my sister just had her 4th baby. So I remember her feet just being like little toes like piglets. Like
Elephants. Yeah. Yeah. No ankles at all.
Yeah. It'll be over soon enough.
It will be. And it's so worth it. I had a good friend remind me the other day. She's like, do you remember when we stood here 8 months ago and you thought you were losing the baby? You know?
Yeah.
And I was like, I know.
That was a
It's
scary
crazy. Yeah. A very scary time. And so I remind myself in all of the uncomfortable that I am so blessed.
So blessed.
Yep.
I know.
I have the things that I prayed for 15 years now,
I
know?
know.
So
I can't wait.
I know I'm so excited.
I'm
It's a little
so
chubby
excited.
thing.
Oh, goodness. Well, we hope y'all are doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. We love our listeners. We love hearing feedback on things that we've talked about and how it's impacted your life and our journeys and kind of laying it out there for you. And if there's ever anything that y'all are struggling with that we haven't touched on, please reach out.
Please,
We would love to know where we're kind of missing the mark if we haven't talked about something. And it always gives us good opportunities to kind of challenge ourselves and what we need to talk about. So
Yeah, and challenge you to not be afraid because somebody needs your story.
Yeah.
And so the question that you may send, even in an uncomfortable moment, is going to help somebody else. And so if God's put something on your heart, please let us know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just throw that out there. But if we're going to kind of go on into what we're going to talk about today, we're talking about how so often we all do this, whether it's the addiction, your loved one's addiction.
Yeah.
Typically that's what our listeners deal with if they're listening to us, but it could be anything that you're dealing with, how you're so focused on a certain problem that you forget the promise that God's given you and the redemption and the restoration, the promises that you so desperately want. Sometimes we're so focused on the problem that you're dealing with now that you forget all that.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about some practical ways that helped us to kind of get past that. And just things that are said in the Bible that give you hope and encouragement of the season of the promise that God has for you.
Yeah. Yeah, this is such a good topic because I struggle with this. I think every human struggles with this. And if we said we didn't, we would be lying for sure. But it's so easy. And I know with the addiction sector that we walk through in season, it was so all consuming. I mean, complete, like the middle of the night stuff, up all night, the anxiety hour around 2 to 3. It was so all consuming. And so it was so hard to focus on God's promises and to even see the light at the end of the tunnel because we were in the midst of such chaos. And so I think this is a great episode because there are practical ways, and I think Katie and I both learned during that season to run back to his promises because they're all there. They're all throughout the Bible. Even the season in my life, and I was just thinking about this, in pregnancy, I've had many complications with this baby, and I had to, God gave me a promise at the very beginning, like boldly. It's part of Jude's story, but God is God of the impossible. But I still would run back when a doctor would give me a tough reading or a tough result to fearing the problem.
Yeah.
And so I finally just wrote it on a huge paper, God is God of the impossible, and it hangs in my mirror. So every morning I wake up, that is what I have to look at. Every night I go to bed, that is what I have to look at, is God's promise. That's one of his promises. And that's what's carried me through this season of pregnancy. And so, I think problems, our minds are innately made that way. Like that is a survival tactic to focus. Like when we're in the woods, is that a stick or a snake? Our minds, God made us that. There's a healthy aspect to that, but there's also a very unhealthy aspect to that. And I've seen a huge shift just I'm such an old soul, but I have the psychological background. There's been a huge shift to our culture where generations ago, problems were not talked about at all. None. They were shoved under the rug. They were not discussed. Everything was great. But we're in a culture now, there's been a huge shift to where we almost hyper focus on problems, and we've lost sight of how to focus on the promise. And so I always say, just be careful in today's culture, because it's so important, even in counseling, to touch those problems and heal from them. But certain counselors, especially not biblical, can send you to let's just focus on the problem and not the solution or not the promise. And so biblical counseling is so important because it points you back to truth and promises and restoration. And then it is possible.
Yeah. I think that you make such a good point. I have a couple of different things in my brain, so I'm trying to figure out which after to go on.
Like, where's my pen?
Okay. Okay. I'm going to touch on the Christian counseling first. But don't skip over that. Don't skip over that, because the world's just going to say, get a counselor. And so you're just focused on getting a counselor. But really focus in on the Christian counseling part, because don't just skip over that. Because for me, the Christian counseling was super key to shifting my perspective on the Lord and not my problem. And that's what we tend to do so we did an episode a little bit back. Oh, my chair just did something weird. Sorry. We did a couple episodes back about perspective.
Yes.
And go back and listen to that, but we're going to kind of touch on it again. But how if you focus so much on the problem, your perspective, it is going to be bad.
It's jaded.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so let's just kind of go to addiction. If you're dealing with your loved one who needs rehab, in rehab, just out of rehab, the enemy is going to try to shift your focus on all of the negative. Yes, they could happen. But if you are so consumed by the negative and the bad perspectives of what could happen, you're never going to heal one, and you're never going to get past it with your loved one. I often call them like helicopter wives or helicopter moms. When loved ones get out of rehab, it's so hard for your loved one to kind of move past that label of addiction, because you're so hyper focused on anything that could happen.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're focused on that perspective
control.
of it.
Yep.
And it's the control. I was guilty of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. And I think that naturally they tell, the guys in S2L recovery, the program, this is going to happen. You need to prepare. But you also have a responsibility to not let it consume you forever.
Yeah. For sure.
So shifting your perspective, this is where the Christian counseling kind of comes into play. This is where getting some accountability partners to kind of just bounce things off of comes into play. Being able to shift your perspective, and we'll talk about ways that you can do that, running the Bible, all that stuff, counseling, but how to focus on the Lord so that you're not so hyper focused on anything negative that could happen. Right?
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge because, we also live in such a self-seeking culture, self-serving culture too, that we stay so focused on like our problems and like that with the wife that's so hyper focused that it's so hard to step outside of that and say, you know what, like maybe they need this from me, or maybe they need grace from me, or maybe they need forgiveness from me. And we understand in the beginning, there's boundaries that have to be put down. Katie and I have talked about that numerous times on this podcast, but there's a healthy balance to that. You know, and I go back to, and I deal with it every day, just doing hair for 15 years and working with so many people. And it aches my heart, especially with what we've been through for the last 7-8 years. People go into counseling and not even dire situations in marriage, and a counselor telling them, allowing them, teaching them to focus on the problem and that your marriage is just not going to make it. You're just not good together. You're just not compatible. Guess what? Nobody's compatible. Nobody. And I go back to like our Christian counselor that's like, hey, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's go back to your past. Let's go back to his past. Let's go back to why we do this. And I'm so grateful for that, because we were taught and raised up to not focus on the problem, but to focus on the solution. And that God did have that promise over our marriage because he united us together. And so it's a precious thing, but it's like Katie said, in perspective, which we're going to touch on that. It's everything. It is everything.
Yeah. And, you know, when we focus on God's promise for your life, you know, you've got to understand that God will overcome anything that you're dealing with. He is the overcomer. Now, I want to take a moment to recognize it might not always look the way that you thought it would.
100%. Yeah.
But he will overcome. He has made that promise to overcome all problems. He won the battle. He overcame death and death on the cross. He has won, and he will win in your life, whatever that looks like. We have listeners who've lost loved ones to addiction.
Yep.
And so we want to recognize that this life is not what they thought it would look like. But God still is good, and he still overcame. And we have seen that in their lives, how God is still so good, even though, you know, it's not what they thought it looked like. One of my favorite verses that, I don't know, I just get this like God's hugging me.
Yes.
When I read this verse,
Yeah.
it's Isaiah 40:31. It's so good.
It's so good.
I feel like this is like a theme verse
Yeah.
for loved ones who are walking in this. But it says, but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. And so, you are, I mean, naturally very tired. A lot of times walking in this with your loved one.
Beyond.
Emotionally, physically, even spiritually, just super weary. But this verse is such an encouragement for you all that he's got it and he will overcome, because he will mount you up with wings and he will overcome whatever you are dealing with. So it's just, I mean, such an encouragement to me when I read that. I feel like I've read that several times in my journey, and I was like, God's got this.
I know.
He's got it.
Yep. It's that's Isaiah was actually speaking to people who were weary and discouraged and encouraging them to wait on God. And I think about this too, because in our season of addiction, and I'm such a visual, and I think I had a counselor to tell me this, like literally visualize being under an eagle's wings and having that
I did that
protection.
too.
Yes. Like, and you can feel that protection. And so I even got a tough phone call 2 weeks ago where a girl that watches had lost a loved one and completely unexpected, no goodbye. I mean, just so terrible, which is typically no goodbyes in this situation, which is so hard because of the closure. But even on this verse, to just stand on this, to put this on your mirror, because it's that waiting of why did this happen? Or the other question of God, how are you going to use this? And in that, which we may never see on this side of heaven. We pray that we do because it gives us those nuggets of, okay, God, like this, I see your fruit and your glory coming out of such a tragic situation. But in that, where it says, they shall not run and shall not be weary, and to wait on the Lord, it's in those moments where you're waiting to see God's glory, to hide under those eagle wings. Visualize that when you feel like the rest of the world doesn't know what you're feeling, doesn't understand. This is that verse that keeps you safe and tucked in
So good.
to one of the most, just precious verses in the Bible to me.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I definitely, that's just so funny. That is one of the verses. There's a couple of like verses, and then there's a couple of stories that I typically always visualize. And that is one of the verses. Prodigal son is one of the ones I always visualize me, just running into God's arms when I just need to find that sense of like comfort, that God's got me.
Yeah.
So
I think it's hard so often. I was thinking about this with this whole episode, to trust promises because we come from a broken, fallen world. And so to us, promises, there's this like jaded aspect to them because promises are often broken by humans. And so for us to remember that God's promises will never be broken. And then you also hear, well, those were in the Bible. Those were back, thousands of years ago. No, they were for you because you are the generation that he promised these to. You are his children. We are the ancestors. These promises are for you just as much as they were for them thousands of years ago.
yeah, it's a good reminder.
And so to not compare promises, and I do it all the time because you're used to broken promises from humans in your life, but God's not human. Like Jesus was in the flesh.
Yeah.
But this promise is from a man who is infallible, perfect. And so just remember that in that moment when you're struggling to trust those promises, that they are true and worthy and stand for you.
Yeah. And so at some point you need to shift your focus from the problem, right, to God's promise. So there has to be some practical ways.
Yeah.
And I know our listeners always kind of like, okay, but like, how do I do it?
Oh yeah. It's easy to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do I shift my focus? Like, how is it, because it's so natural for us humans to be so focused on our loved one or whatever the problem is. It's so natural for us to focus on that. How do we shift our focus to the promises that God has? And I kind of mentioned it earlier, and we say it all the time, but the Bible gives you, it's like a handbook.
From Genesis to Revelations, literally.
It is a handbook that was written that gives you answers. It gives you answers for everything. And a lot of Bibles will have in the back, if you're dealing with something specific, it will give you the verses to go to. It is literally a handbook.
Yeah.
So like if you're dealing with depression, if you're dealing with anxiety over something, if you're dealing with, pride, it will give you those verses that you can go and you can study and say, okay, God, you're giving me this reminder right now. So it kind of helps shift that focus.
Yeah. And another thing, don't shame yourself in that. Like that verse that carried Katie and I through, I don't know that whole verse line to line, but what I do know is he will hide you and shield you under his eagle wings. That's all that I needed to know that God put in my heart from that verse when I needed it.
Right.
So it's okay if you don't know. But my papa used to say, I don't know all the addresses. I know what the Bible says. And that verse is what I envision in the moments that I felt so naked and alone was God will hide you under his eagle wings. That's what I needed to know out of that verse, But if we didn't do our Bible reading or know the Bible, that verse couldn't have carried us through. And anytime you open this Bible, I opened up to Joshua and it's literally one of the greatest promises in the Bible right here. I was like, how cool is that? But I cannot tell you how many times on a tough day that I will open up that Bible and he will take you right where he wants.
I know, it is kind of funny.
Insane. It's insane. It's a living word though,
Yeah. Other ones, just praying. There are studies out there on praying is difficult for some people. And like knowing what to pray. It's not just praying over your food.
Yes.
Which
or
we
your hamburger.
typically,
Yeah. Pray for
But-
that, but
But praying continually
Yeah.
throughout the day, I think, is something so important that I've learned over the years. Like when God brings something to your mind, to stop and pray,
Yeah.
because it's just a direct access. I mean, that's so cool. The cool thing about, what we believe is that we have direct access to our Savior. And if you're struggling about something, if you're super hyper focused on the journey that you're walking on and the problem that you have, just giving it to God, directly to Him, it offers a peace and a comfort. And I often have said that I get chill bumps sometimes when I'm praying or I'm singing. A lot of times my form of prayer is worship, is because I'm talking directly to God in my song, and I'll get those chill bumps. And I really do feel like it's just like God's presence and His wrapping His arms around me. And so prayer is a one that kind of helps you shift your focus.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that, because there's so often I get a question of like, well, how do I pray? Maybe you were never raised that way, and that's okay. Like, it's never too late.
Yeah.
But He's your best friend, and talk to Him like He's your best friend. Like, you would pick up the phone and you would talk to Him. And, it's one of those, there's a quote, and I forget the whole thing, but it says like, prayer doesn't change God, it changes you. And it's amazing when you get to that place where you're talking to Him all day, every day, how your whole perspective changes. And I know when I'm not talking to Him, my whole perspective changes.
Yeah, exactly.
For the worse. Another one that I love is keeping a journal of God's promises and answered prayers.
Yeah.
And I think I've told you, we have a
You're good at
notebook
that.
at the house
Yeah.
that, I forget what we call it, but thank you letters or like answered prayers. We put it all in there because it's so easy in the chaos of life to forget what He's done, like to the littlest from the biggest. And so even if it's a one line, like, my results were great again today, like that's a miracle, whatever it may be, write that. And when you're feeling discouraged, when you're focusing on a problem again, go back and read that notebook, and it will reiterate how good God is no matter what.
I love that y'all do that.
It's
That's so sweet.
and I don't go back and read it often. I should, but I love to
That's
go back
just your
and read it.
perspective. If you're struggling with
Whew.
something and you
Yeah.
read through that, all the God's promises that
Yeah.
He's done in y'all's life, and you are super focused on one other problem, it really does. I can see how that would shift your focus to all the promises.
Yeah. 'Cause I
that He has in
forget.
store for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so special. So, and we may go 2 months from writing in it, but don't ever let it stop you, and so it's special.
And then, having accountability and maybe a group of friends, a small group or a mentor, maybe be praying about somebody in your life that can mentor you through this season. Because when you talk it out, the problem out, your mentor or your small group, if they're good ones that you've chose, they're going to help you shift your focus to God's promise and God's goodness in your life. And they're not going to be the one to heal it, but they will help you shift your focus to the one who can.
I still remember years ago when I called Katie, and I've talked about it before, but John was going back to his stomping grounds where everything started and was still there. And Katie taught me through it, and I literally just let my hands go.
Yeah.
But
Stop doing
she
that.
helped me to completely shift my focus, where I surrendered that entire weekend, and God moved in it. But if I wouldn't have talked to her, I don't know what that weekend would have looked like for both of us.
Yeah.
And I just had a mentor that walked me through it, and there's so much power in that.
Yeah.
And if you don't have one, pray for one, and God will send that.
Yeah. And, it's nice to have somebody that's walked that same journey, because they kind of know what you're feeling, the desperation and the control that you want to have over the situation. Like, when she talked to me, I remember I felt everything she was saying.
Legit.
I had tears in my eyes as she was telling me, because I felt it.
Yeah.
And so it's good to have somebody that knows what you're dealing with, but can also remind you of God's goodness and all that He's done.
Oh, yeah.
So
It's powerful.
pray for those people in your life if you don't have it.
Yeah.
So, anything else?
I think we're good.
Okay. Well, we do. We hope that you have found encouragement today to kind of walk this journey of shifting your focus to God's promises in your life, because he does have so much good. I know this world is evil. I know that you might be walking through something so desperate that you just don't know how you're going to make it through. We get it. But God's promises are real, and whatever the outcome is, he is faithful and he will overcome, because he has overcome evil in every aspect. So we hope that you found encouragement in that. And if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe so you can hear what we're going to talk about next week. We got a good one. And we hope that if you are seeing this on our socials, that you share it with whoever might be dealing with something that might find encouragement in what we're talking about. So we hope that you have a blessed day, and we will see you next week. Bye.